Yo, welcome into another episode of Mets Daily here on the Fan Arch Network. I'm your host, John Saponaro, here with you today and every day as we talk about the New York Mets. And before we get started, of course, a quick shout out goes to our friends over at Kalshi. And for a limited time, you can use the code FANARCHBASEBALL at Kalshi.com and the Kalshi app to get 10 when you trade 10. Yesterday was a much needed day off for the New York Mets after traveling to the West Coast with no break, going straight from Citi Field to Seattle to take on the Mariners for 3. Of course, they're able to salvage the final game of that series to avoid the sweep, and now they have a moment to reset as they fly down the West Coast from Seattle to start a 3-game series in San Diego, in Southern California, against the Padres. And we're going to start right there because the Padres are another team sort of like Seattle that had some good expectations, that is on paper a good team, and in some ways playing like a good team, although there have been issues. And where have you heard that before but with our New York Mets? And there's some strange parallels between the San Diego Padres and the New York Mets. Both teams starved for offense from some of their star players. Both teams having dealt with some injuries. Both teams having dealt with star players not performing up to expectations, not only for 2026, but lofty expectations that were set on the back of their baseball card. Now, despite all of that, the Padres do come into this series with a winning record sitting at 32-29, but they have lost 5 games in a row. That includes 8 of their last 9, and they were swept not once, but twice by the Philadelphia Phillies in the last week, both at home and on the road. So they are dealing with some issues here in Southern California. I may make my way out to one of these games down in San Diego. I may not. It depends. Usually, I love to get down to San Diego. Personally, the ballpark is great. The ambiance is great. Mets and Padres usually put on a pretty good show. Those teams have kind of been jockeying back and forth since their playoff rivalry from a couple of years ago. But this weekend, I don't know if it's in the cards for me, man. The weekend series can be a real bear to try to get from Los Angeles, especially where I live up closer to Burbank, up in the valley, to get all the way down to San Diego and then try to get back in the same night. If you leave 20 minutes too late, you wind up sitting in absolutely brutal traffic. I once thought I was going to get down there in time for lunch to meet a buddy, and I almost missed first pitch. That's how bad the traffic was. So we'll see if I make my way down to San Diego this weekend. But regardless, the New York Mets are going to be there. Regardless, we are going to be watching. And I think 2 of the most confounding players for San Diego this season have been Fernando Tatis Jr., who is sitting with 1 home run on the season. That's right, 1 home run. Also just odd. I know it's been out of necessity and trying to get bats in the lineup and trying to shape their lineup and their defensive positioning as best they can with the personnel that they have. But you're looking at one of, if not the best right fielders in baseball, who is playing a ton of second base for the Padres, which again feels like a move that maybe the Mets would be forced to do this season especially. I mean, look no further than Bo Bichette, a shortstop who played second base in the playoffs for Toronto, forced to be a shortstop again after the Mets sign him to play third base, a position he's never played before. So Fernando Tatis, freakishly athletic. We know he came up as a shortstop, but it's just so odd to see someone who is a terrific outfielder. Again, maybe the best right fielder defensively in the entire sport, moving positions out of necessity. But he's sitting with that 1 home run. And aside from that, he's had a pretty decent year. But you don't look at this guy, even in the post-PED suspension portion of Fernando Tatis Jr., you don't look at him as a guy who's going to have 1 home run in the month of June. And on the flip side of things, you've got Manny Machado, a very polarizing player around the league. Some people hate him. Some people love him. Some think he's dirty. Some, if he's on your team, you love him. If he plays against your team, you hate him. But this guy has 11 home runs, 32 RBI, which, maybe a little down for somebody of his caliber, but pretty good numbers, fairly representative. And then you take a look over at his batting average and his slash line. Manny Machado, yes, the Manny Machado, hitting 74 on the season. He's got a 262 on base percentage and a 357 slug to go right along with it. And his OPS 619, which would fit in very, very well on the New York Mets. That OPS starting with a 6 is something that us Mets fans are far too familiar with for our liking. But just two very odd seasons for two very good players. When you look at Manny Machado, you could make the case that he started to get old before our very eyes, sure. But you look at the numbers he put up last year, you look at the season he had the year before that, and you just don't see this kind of fall off a cliff in terms of production. And we know in modern baseball, batting average isn't everything. But I don't think any of us would have ever predicted that this far into a season, Manny Machado would be sitting on the interstate, 174. I mean, 174 in June, he's not even close to hitting 200. He'd have to go on a crazy heater to get that batting average over the 200 mark. So interesting for sure. We'll see if either one of those guys use the Mets as an excuse to break out, which again is something that we're used to, but hopefully that is not the case. Hopefully these guys being a bit down, these guys having these weird wonky seasons is something that plays into the favor of our New York Mets. Let's take a look at the pitching matchups really quickly. So starting things off on Friday, Mets are going to see Michael King, who's had an okay season. If you go back his last three starts ago, he pitched 7 shutout against the Los Angeles Dodgers, division rival, of course, the great vaunted Los Angeles Dodgers. And since then, King's not been that good. 9 earned runs versus the Athletics and the Nationals. So he's coming off of a great start a couple weeks ago, and now 2 back-to-back ones that haven't really been that good at all. Again, will that play into the Mets' favor? The Mets have made pitchers with worse stuff than Michael King look like Cy Young winners so far here in 2026. So I'm not 100% sure what to expect. I'm not sure if you could bank on Michael King having another bad start, a third bad start in a row. I don't know if he's that kind of a pitcher at this point in his career, where he's not going to figure out some things. And then again, some of the ineptitude of the Mets offense that we've seen all season long might rear its ugly head. So this matchup is going to be pretty interesting. Christian Scott going for the New York Mets. But then you get into the rest of the series on Saturday and Sunday, and here's where I think the Mets should have somewhat of an advantage, particularly on Saturday. Saturday, it's old friend Griffin Canning, who has been absolutely atrocious. Now, he started the season late, of course, coming off of that torn Achilles that he suffered with the Mets last year. He's only made 6 starts so far, but he is 0-4 on the year. He's got a 7.16 ERA. I'll repeat that. 0-4, 7.16 ERA. This is a guy who also doesn't have great stuff. We saw it with the Mets last year. His stuff played up. It seemed like the Mets got the best out of Canning before that awful Achilles injury ended his season and kind of derailed, which was sort of a resurgence of his career. But we know, dating back to his time in Anaheim, Griffin Canning, not necessarily a plus stuff guy. So I'm hoping that on Saturday it can be a little bit of a get-right game for the Mets. And going for the Mets is Nolan McLean. So nothing's a given. We know McLean had a couple bad starts and then a little bit of a bounce back that final game against the Marlins, but he did not look great. He was not the dominant Nolan McLean. So we'll see. But on paper, you got to give the edge to the Mets. And I do want to take a second to just dive a little deeper into some of these numbers. You know, I don't like throwing numbers at you like crazy on this show, but they are just abysmal for Griffin Canning. When I was doing a little bit of the research prior to hitting the record button, I was just kind of flabbergasted when you look at this. I mean, when you see 0-4 and you see the 7.16 ERA, you're like, yeah, that's bad enough. You could probably stop right there. But he's pitched just over 27 innings on the season. He's given up 28 hits to go along with 15 walks and 22 earned runs. I mean, that is DFA territory for Griffin Canning. And I don't know if it's going to go that route, But man, he's going to have to turn this thing around quick, because I don't know how long you can keep a guy like that in your starting rotation, regardless of the shape of your rotation, because that is, I wouldn't even say borderline unpitchable. That is legitimately unpitchable. And then on Sunday, final game of the series, you got Randy Vasquez, who again, like Michael King, okay season. He doesn't go deep in games, though. That's one thing that you want to keep an eye out for with Vasquez on Sunday. A lot of starts, 4 2/3, 5 innings on the nose, 4 1/3. So I think he's a guy that you can maybe get to, and you can get into, hopefully, the softer part of that San Diego bullpen. And we know the San Diego Padres have a good bullpen, led, of course, by the best relief pitcher in all of baseball, Mason Miller, at the end of games. So you'd like to have a lead in a couple of these games, because you don't want to have to go into the 9th inning trying to beat Mason Miller, who has been the closest thing to unhittable that we've seen probably since Edwin Diaz had that remarkably unhittable season with the Mets, and even before that when Edwin Diaz had that unbelievable season pitching with the Seattle Mariners. So it's probably, maybe, Mets haven't announced it yet as of the time of this recording, it's probably going to be Sean Manaea on Sunday, either with an opener or with a traditional start. We'll talk about the aspect of a traditional start coming up in a moment. But there, I would say, just maybe off veteran prowess alone, you might be able to give a slight edge to the New York Mets. But this is a series, I think, if we're being honest, obviously the Mets need to win. Mets need to win a series to get a 500 road trip. Mets need to win a series because they need to stock wins. Mets need to keep on winning series. But this is a series I think the Mets should be able to win. I really do. I don't care that it's on the road. They're adjusted to the time zone now. They did a good job of not letting a small 2-game losing streak versus Seattle spiral. They came out, they had a good game. They played with a lot of energy. They scored runs. They pitched well. They played good defense. So let's keep that trend going. If they do, I think the Mets should be able to take 2 of 3 here at minimum from the San Diego Padres, and they're going to need to. On Friday, we may see the return of Jorge Polanco to the Mets lineup, and it would be a welcome sight if we're able to see Polanco back with the Mets. Polanco is a professional hitter. Polanco is a major league hitter, of course. Polanco is a guy who's switch hitter, brings pop, brings clutch, brings bat to ball, and he will lengthen out this lineup. I know to this point, a lot of people are going to use that Jed Lowry comparison. He hasn't been here. He's been hurt. We know the injuries are frustrating. He's an injury-prone player over his career. The Achilles, the wrist. He's going to be dealing with the Achilles all season. But the Mets need a bat like Jorge Polanco back in their lineup desperately. Again, we don't know if it's going to be Friday yet, but we know it's going to be soon. Earlier in the week, the Mets were optimistic and pushing and hoping for Friday to open up the series with San Diego. And we'll see if that comes to fruition here today. Unsure to this point again, but whether it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or outside chance maybe back on the homestand, Jorge Polanco is going to be a sight for sore eyes. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about Mark Vientos over the last 3 days, and I don't want to go there again. You guys can go back and listen, especially to yesterday's show, where I really let Mark Vientos have it, and I really let my feelings on the matter known. But there are 2 schools of thought here. What the Mets are probably going to do whenever Jorge Polanco is ready to come off the IL, and what I, John Saponaro, host of Mets Daily, would do. What I think the Mets are going to do, most likely, is probably send down Eric Wagaman. There's probably an outside chance that they send down MJ Melendez, but they didn't send down Melendez for Jared Young, and those are both lefties coming off the bench and doing similar things, sort of similar profile players. So that one feels a little less likely for me, especially since when Young came off the IL, Melendez was mired in a pretty bad slump. And in the small sample size since, Melendez has actually started to look a little bit better. There's been an uptick in his offensive output. So I think now would be a weird time to send down MJ Melendez, although the Mets have made some weird roster decisions already in 2026 as far as their 26-man roster goes and available players. So I'm not going to put anything past them. That said, I think the most likely thing is Eric Wagaman. He's going to go down to AAA. But if it were me running the New York Mets, I would be DFAing Mark Vientos. I would keep Eric Wagaman on this roster. Do I think Eric Wagaman is some kind of great baseball player? I don't. But I think that, unlike Mark Vientos, there are some things that Eric Wagaman does that come as advertised. Play first, play third, play the corner outfield spots. That already gives you more versatility than what Mark Vientos offers from a lineup construction standpoint. Now, look, you're not going to put Wagaman in the outfield instead of the kids or instead of Juan Soto, certainly. But with first base being a little bit of a revolving door, with third base basically being Brett Beatty's job and Wagaman being opposite-handed, there's a chance that, you can have him over there. But also, over the course of his career, Wagaman runs into home runs. He hits lefties. He hit a monster home run for the Mets a couple days ago. So, to me, I would just take the known commodity over the guy who's a headache, over the guy who's an absolute pain in Mark Vientos. So when I said yesterday that I'm ready to move on from Mark Vientos, it's true, because I am advocating to keep Eric Wagaman on the roster over him. But I do think most likely he goes down, Vientos stays. I think that's what the Mets are going to do. And with that said, I would like to see Polanco get most of the DH reps. I think that's going to help his Achilles. I think it's going to keep him healthier longer, and I think that's the prudent move for the Mets right now. And I think that's fine because you have Jared Young, who plays a good first base and hits left-handed, and he should get all of the starts versus right-handed pitching. And that will at least relegate Mark Vientos to a spot on the bench where he is a short side platoon player, getting first base and maybe some DH reps against left-handed pitching. You can mix in Polanco if you want to get him out there at first base. That's fine. Again, I would kind of limit myself as far as exposure for Polanco in the field just to try to keep him healthy, because his bat is more important than what he does with his glove at first base. Keeping him healthy and keeping him in the lineup is paramount. And we saw it because he got off to a slow start. This is Polanco. But once his Achilles and then his wrist really started acting up on him, he wasn't even having any good at bats at that point. So he went from, making good contact, not seeing the results, having good at bats, kind of looking like Jorge Polanco, to looking like a guy who could barely stand in the batter's box and swing hard because his Achilles was killing him. So I would try to keep him healthy. I would try to keep him just hitting. He's going to have to run the bases anyway. This isn't slow pitch softball. You can't get a courtesy runner for him. So I would keep Polanco in that DH spot as often as possible. The only problem with Vientos to the bench and why I would get Vientos off this roster is you're going to see sad Mark Vientos. Mark Vientos and his ego is not suited for a bench role. We saw it at the start of the season. Mark Vientos was basically on this team out of, necessity, a guy who's out of options. They didn't really want to play Mark Vientos. And then, they kind of had to because of injuries. Then he heated up a bit. Now he's the best/only option to play first base most times. But that playing time is shrinking. First with Jared Young, and now with the inevitable return of Jorge Polanco, whether it happens Friday or not. So I don't know if you're even going to get a representative ball player out of Mark Vientos if he's riding the bench, let's say, 5 out of 6 games. And that's why, for me, another reason why I would just stick with the guy who is okay with being a bench player in Eric Wagaman. He'll get his starts against lefties. Maybe he'll leave the yard a couple times, hit a few balls hard. And again, at least he gives you the versatility of being able to play at minimum first and third. And also in a pinch, or also if he has a couple good games and you want to stick him out in right field against a tough lefty to give Benj a spell or whatever the case may be. Vientos doesn't offer any of that. So I wouldn't be in a fast hurry to make any kind of accommodations for one Mark Vientos. Baseball season is here and you can trade every game on Kalshi. I was just on the Kalshi app right before I hit record, and I saw an interesting one for Friday's game, Mets at Padres. Of course, it's Christian Scott versus Michael King. The over-under, 7.5 runs for the game. And I think when you talk about the offensive futility of both of these teams, I like the under. And if you go with the under, $100 will get you $189. Again, we hope the Mets bats break out. And I think in this series they have potential to. But I don't know if it's going to happen on Friday with a quality arm like King on the mound. And I think some props goes out to Christian Scott for what he's done. And we already talked about some of the anemic nature of the San Diego Padres lineup in their own right. So I think under 7.5 runs is a good idea. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there is no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use the code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10 Kalshi. Trade on anything. 18 and over only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risks and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Got to take a moment here to talk about AJ Ewing and give the kid his flowers. We say that a lot on this show, and I know I haven't been doing this show very long, but giving people their flowers is something that's really important. And AJ Ewing, I wanted to talk about him on the show yesterday, but with everything else going on in that game, I just couldn't shoehorn his day into it. Needed to talk about Bo Bichette, needed to talk about Freddie Peralta, needed to talk about the series ending, and needed to talk about Mark Vientos being a bonehead, putting his foot so far down his mouth. But AJ Ewing is showing tremendous poise, and he has since the moment he was called up. But on Wednesday, in that series finale, he picks up 3 hits, looks really good. Obviously, he's played excellent defense in center field. That's been kind of an MO for AJ Ewing coming up through the minors, and that's terrific to see. Plays with his hair on fire, a plus runner, and all of that is great, but the at-bats have been really, really, really good. And what I love to see from a young player is the adjustment. Because whether you start off hot like AJ Ewing did, or you start off cold like Carson Benj did, the league is going to adjust to you. There's so much technology. These scouting reports are so thorough. There's video on everything and everybody in every situation. And so regardless of how you start, the league is going to catch up. And if you're a hitter, they're going to learn how to pitch to you. If you're a pitcher, they're going to learn how to hit off of you. And AJ Ewing, like I said, came out of the gates electric. But then you saw a few hitless games start to pile up. I want to give him credit because he's only played 22 big league games, and he's been hitless in just 9 of them. So less than half, which means even when he doesn't look great, he's getting his hits. He's getting a one-hit day, which is nice. One-hit days keep the doctor away. But the biggest issue with AJ Ewing over this little down spell that he's been in towards the end of May, beginning of June, has been the K rate. He's striking out way too much. His K rate on the season is 32%, just a tick over 32. If you go back and you look at all of AJ Ewing's numbers throughout the minor leagues, he's never finished a season with a K rate that high. He's never had a season with a K rate that starts with a 3. Last few seasons in the minors, it's been around half that. You're looking at 15%, 16% in that range. Earlier in his pro career, he had a season where he sat 28, 29%, and that's the closest he's ever come. And he hasn't hit that number in about 3 years. So you don't like to see that many strikeouts from a player who is known for putting the bat on the ball. But I think when you look a little deeper, It's just because of another positive that AJ Ewing exhibits, which is his ability to work the count, see a lot of pitches, look at a lot of pitches. I think that was a huge part of his success when he first came up. He wasn't jumpy. He was taking really solid at bats. He was letting pitchers come to him, and that was great. But again, league adjusts to you, you have to adjust back. And so what they started to do was just throw him more strikes. And with 2 strikes, he was leaving the bat on his shoulder a lot. Yeah, of course, there's swinging strikeouts mixed in there too, some nasty breaking pitches, things like that. But there was a passivity in his approach. And what I love to see over not just the game on Wednesday, but the last 2 games in Seattle specifically. And they talked about this, I think, a bit on the broadcast on either Tuesday or Wednesday. But Ewing started to go after the first pitch a little bit more. You're not going to get ahead of me. It's Gandalf, right? You shall not pass. You throw me a first pitch fastball down the middle because you think that I'm the guy from 2 weeks ago and you think I'm going to take it and I'm going to let you get an easy strike on me, you're mistaken. I'm going to tee up that ball. I'm going to get a hit. Now I'm going to be on base and I'm hopefully going to wreak some havoc. And so I love the adjustments that we've seen over a very short sample size. But again, you're talking about a guy with 22 career Major League Baseball games. Every sample size is small. And we're doing a daily show. And like I said on our first show, when you do a show 5 times a week, you can react to the tiny stuff more so than when you do a show once a week. You can take a micro approach to some things. And I think AJ Ewing and his approach at the plate and the transition that he has shown is definitely something that needs to be shouted out. Last but certainly not least, Jonah Tong, as I speculated, and a lot of us did, got sent down officially the other day after his game. And now you look at the Mets starting rotation and you wonder, what exactly are they going to do? We talked about the top of the rotation. It's pretty locked in. You've got Peralta, you've got McLean, and who would have thought this on opening day, but you got Christian Scott. Those guys have been there. Those guys are going to be there. Beyond that, this is where it starts to get dicey, especially with Clay Holmes injured and now Jonah Tong being sent down. We did a whole segment on Sean Manaea a couple days ago, and I think Sean Manaea deserves in that he has earned a traditional start. But more importantly than what Sean Manaea needs and deserves, the Mets need him to give them a traditional start and be good at it. Because all of a sudden, if you get, and he doesn't have to be 2024 Sean Manaea, just a piece of that. If he even touches on that, well, now you've got a representative 1 through 4. Can he do that? I'm unsure. But I think at this point, the Mets owe it to Sean Manaea and they owe it to themselves, again, more importantly, to see if he can deliver on that. Beyond that, the options aren't great. The option for that 5th spot doesn't look so hot. Because look, Jonah Tong is not ready. He didn't get his doors blown off. He didn't look like a deer in the headlights, but he's not ready. Jack Wenninger is not ready. Better repertoire, sure. More major league repertoire, yeah. But it's clear he's not ready because the Mets aren't reaching for him. I think Zach Thornton might be sort of kind of ready, maybe a bit more ready because he has the repertoire and he throws strikes, but he's probably not ready really. So I don't want to reach for that. And Tobias Myers isn't stretched out yet. He would be the best option, and we talked about this the other day. The Mets should have stretched him out sooner, but they didn't. And now that they need him, or a pitcher like him, they can't go to him. I think eventually he will get stretched out over the next couple weeks in AAA, and he'll probably be in this Major League rotation, maybe after the All-Star break, something like that. But he's not an option right now. So the options aren't great. And with that said, that's why I'd go with Sean Manaea in a traditional start, because I would go back to David Peterson in the bulk relief role. I think you can get through one turn in the rotation with an opener, and that's where I'd go. David Peterson being left-handed helps you out because you can go to either Austin Warren or Huascar Brazaban to give a different look to start those games, have them go an inning or two, and then go to David Peterson. He's been really good in that role. That's what I would do. I don't love it. I don't love David Peterson. But again, to be fair, he's been good in the role, so I can't hate on him too much. The one good bit here is that the Mets don't need a starting pitcher because of the off day today and the off day after the series in San Diego when they fly back east. They won't need another starting pitcher in the rotation beyond Peralta, McLean, and probably Minaya until at least June 10th, but definitely by June 13th. June 13th, if you keep everybody on regular rest, you can push this off a couple weeks. June 10th, if you want to give extra rest to Scott, McLean, and Minaya, which I think the Mets might want to do, is when you'd need to insert somebody else. And that's why I wouldn't upset the apple cart. I wouldn't go reaching into the minor leagues. I would just give David Peterson the option to start that game or the opportunity to start that game with an opener. I'd go opener, I'd go Peterson, and I'd see what it looks like on June 10th. Because the last thing I'll say before we get out of here for the week is that one person who is not an option, in my opinion, is Kodai Senga. Kodai Senga has not looked good, and I think I mentioned this on the show earlier this week. Even Carlos Mendoza kind of told you where the Mets were at with Kodai Senga. He said he's healthy, now he needs to be effective. And he has not been effective on this rehab stint in AAA. Now, eventually the rehab stint comes to an end, and he's going to have to get called up. But if I were the Mets, I'd milk this 30 days all the way to the end, and I'd see where you're at then. I'm not reaching down for Kodai Senga. I'm not rushing to get Kodai Senga up here. I don't like any of these options. I don't love Peterson. Again, Tong and Wenninger not ready. Thornton probably not ready. But to me, Senga is the worst of the bunch. That's going to do it for this episode of Mets Daily. My name is John Saponaro. Remember, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the channel. We're sitting at just over 4,000 subscribers, and we would love to get to 5,000. And more than that, we would love for you to be a part of it. Till next time on Mets Daily, see you guys on Monday. Let's go Mets.